No. Miss McLeod?
Yes, indeed, my lord, please.
Good afternoon, Miss McLeod.
Good afternoon.
As you know, you're about to be asked questions by Mr. McIntosh, who's sitting opposite you. But before you do that, I understand you're prepared to affirm.
Yes.
Sitting where you are, can I ask you to repeat these words after me? I solemnly, sincerely, and truly
I solemnly, sincerely, and truly
declare and affirm
declare and affirm
that I will tell the truth,
that I will tell the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the
and
truth.
nothing but the truth.
Thank you, Miss McLeod. Now, I don't know how long your evidence will take. We will certainly sit on till 4 if the evidence takes that time. But if at any stage you want to take a break, just give me an indication and we can take that break. Now, something I say to everyone at this stage is that it's important that you're heard. These microphones are there to help and they should do the job. I'm very conscious of this because my hearing is not what it is. And I think you've maybe got quite a quiet voice. So can I encourage you to speak louder than you would normally speak and possibly a bit slower? It's Mr. McIntosh's responsibility to set the pace and to make sure that you're reminded about keeping your voice up. But if I could ask you to bear that in mind, I'd be very grateful.
Okay, no problem.
Now, Mr. McIntosh.
Thank you, my lord. Ms. McLeod, I wonder if I can take your full name.
It's Mairi McLeod.
And are you currently retired?
I am.
Yes. Did you produce a statement in response to a questionnaire from the inquiry?
I did.
Are you willing to adopt that as part of your evidence?
Yes, I am.
Thank you. Now, what I want to do is just to turn to almost the last page, which is on the bundle, page 305. It's part of your CV, and I note at the top of the page you describe your role as corporate from 2000 to 2003 as corporate affairs manager, South Glasgow University Hospital NHS Trust, and then in 2003 2006 you become project manager, acute services project, ACH project. Now, what's the ACH in that?
It was ambulatory care hospital, they called it.
And where was that built?
It was the Victoria.
Was that procured through a private finance or something like that?
It was.
It was, right.
It was.
Now, in acute services strategy, that was a rather large procurement process that GGC was running. Now, the transcriptor can't do So if you agree with me, or you're saying yes, please say yes. To whom did you report when you were project manager for the ACH project?
I reported to Jane Sambrook and also to Alec McIntyre.
And where in the system did Helen Byrne sit? Because I understand she might have been director of the acute services strategy. Or maybe that had been a bit later.
I think she was a bit later. She was definitely for the Glasgow hospitals. I don't recall her being for the ambulatory care hospital.
Okay. Now, the ambulatory care hospital, I may have misunderstood, so I want to just check whether I'm talking about the right project. But was this a project that ended up having some problem of overheating in a glass atrium?
I don't think it was the Victoria.
Right.
It may well have been Stop Hill.
And you weren't involved in Stop Hill?
I wasn't involved in Stop Hill.
We move on to the second part of the project manager, the final part of the new children's hospital. Am I right in thinking you stepped from one job to the other? So it's 2006 you start.
I did, but I applied for the job for the new children's hospital and was successful. Right. It wasn't just a slot over.
I understand. And to whom did you report?
I reported to Alan Seaborn.
And he was the director of the whole new hospital?
Yes, right. Yes.
The project manager, sorry, for the whole new hospital.
Yes.
Okay. Now, if we go into, again within your questionnaire, this time to question 5, which is on page 292. We asked you, when did you first become involved in the design of the Queen Elizabeth Royal Hospital for Children? Please describe your roles and responsibilities. And you said, I first became involved in the design of the Royal Hospital for Children in 2006. I was project manager overseeing the clinical input and the views of young people and their carers. Was that the limit of your job in 2006, or was there other aspects to it?
That was the limit, but that's a huge workload, because there are so many clinical specialties within children's hospitals, and there was quite a lot of parent groups, kind of like cancer.
So is this
care.
a sort of user group type system where you're consulting the clinicians and the managers?
Yes, I was.
Now, it's quite important that we understand the nature of your job as project manager of the Children's Hospital. And I suppose there's two possibilities here. One might be that every single decision that involved the Children's Hospital, as it were, went through you. And the other might be that you were actually only responsible for various aspects of the building, and other bits of the decision went directly to Mr. Seaborn or Mr. Moyer without passing through you. Which of either of those might be closer to reality?
It would be the first, so some aspects, but not all aspects. So I was involved in the clinical design of the hospital, so ensuring that the needs of the patient and the staff were met to deliver care to.
So one of the issues that's
population.
particularly important to this inquiry and interest, and I appreciate it's not by any means the only factor when you design a new hospital of hundreds of millions of pounds, is the ventilation system. To what extent did the ventilation system fall within of the Children's Hospital, to any extent fall within your responsibility as project manager of the Children's Hospital?
No, it didn't. I have got no technical knowledge to advise on that. So
how could you ensure that, for example, the Schiehallion unit or the critical care areas on the first floor met the standards required by the clinicians and the patients if you weren't involved in ventilation?
I was only involved in the spatial design of the building. So from initially what department would be beside what department, to make sure that, for example, accident and emergency or emergency department would need to be beside imaging. So they would need to be together. Wards near theatre, for example.
I wonder if we can go to page 302 of the bundle, which is question 31. So I jump around a bit, where we asked you a similar question. 302, yeah. Something exciting has happened. There we are. The bottom of the page, if we can zoom in. As project manager responsible for the tendering, planning, design, commissioning, delivery of the Royal Hospital for Children, please explain why you are unable to answer the relevant questions about which clearly within your remit. This was us a follow-up question to you. The inquiry is keen to understand what you say your role was, and why, if it's the case, it was not your role to ensure the Royal Hospital for Children was handed over in all respects as desired. And you've said, issues relating to hard facilities management, I'm assuming that's FM, you're nodding, which would include water and taps, were the responsibility of Mairi and the estates team and not within my remit. My role was to manage the stakeholder input to the design of the Children's Hospital. These involved ensuring that expectations were managed and programme targets and costs were contained. Engineering, plumbing and electrical design for the bill were not within my remit. Now, what I don't understand is, if, to take an example, you are Professor Gibson, and who leads the Schiehallion unit at the time,
Yes.
and you feel, as I understand she might have done, that the offices were in the wrong place and it was inconvenient to the way she worked. Is that something that she was concerned about?
Yes, but there were a number of clinicians in the Children's Hospital.
I mean, not just her, but she was one of them.
Yes, yeah, that's
so would that not dispute's the wrong word, would that debate and discussion have been within your remit?
It was I would be involved in the discussions about that, but that was a decision that had already been made, because if we'd built the offices within the hospital build, it would put the costs up, because to build a hospital per square foot is much dearer than to build an office block square foot. And with technology, the way it was moving with IT, and it was decided, not by me personally, but that was the decision that had been made, that the offices would be separate from the build.
But what I mean to say
attached.
is that if Professor Gibson goes to a user group and says, I don't like the fact that our offices are going to be the next building, would that be some of the expectation management that you're involved in?
Yes.
Yes, right.
And I would say to her that decision has been made, and that's not what we're here to discuss. We're here to discuss the clinical layout of Schiehallion.
Now, the clinical layout of Schiehallion. So and I don't know whether she did this, so I'm not going to put her name, but I imagine if a clinician in the Schiehallion unit had come to you and said, I'd like to double check that the isolation rooms in the Schiehallion unit are the right sort of isolation rooms, because I have a particular immunocompromised group of patients who are going to be accommodated in them. Was that something that you would get involved in?
I wouldn't have the answer, but I would take her concerns and go back and find out.
To whom would you take the concerns?
I would take it to probably David Hall, Karen Brown, he was our technical advisor to the board, or to Peter Moyer.
Ultimately, and if we take a similar example, if someone had looked at the drawings for the Schiehallion unit and noticed that there was no double door lobby at the entrance to the ward, as had been the case in the old Schiehallion unit at York Hill, and had drawn that to your attention, would that have been something you would have been involved in addressing?
If it was at the 1 to 200 or the 1 to 50 meetings, so when we were doing the design, then yes, that would be flagged up.
To what extent do you consider it to have been your responsibility to ensure that the Children's Hospital met the needs of the Greater Glasgow and Clyde Health Board?
Yes, I think that was my responsibility, but I couldn't advise on technical things that were going on behind the walls.
But to what extent was it your responsibility to make sure that somebody did look at the technical matters?
I would pass that information to the technical team, and they would take it on board. That would be my understanding. And if there was a reason why, for example, the double doors couldn't be designed in, I would take that back to the users.
But what would it be your responsibility to make sure that the hospital, the Children's Hospital, was built in accordance with the requirements set by the Health Board and approved by it in, what was it, April 2009? Was that your responsibility?
No, I didn't have that level of responsibility. I had people I reported to that made those decisions, and I would report up the way.
So who would have had the responsibility to make sure that the hospital was built as the board in its April 2000 and, in fact, it wasn't the board, it was one of its subcommittees, the board subcommittee in April 2009 approved?
That would be the executive project team who were
the executive project team,
who would be Alan Seaborn, then David Loud, with that level.
And you weren't a member of the executive project board?
Ms. McIntosh, can you remind me why you're taking the April 2009 date? I'm sure I should know.
There is a minute, I can't immediately recollect which bundle it is, of the of one of the board subcommittees in which in April 2010 the presentation is made of the...
No, you've just said April 2010.
April 2009, sorry, is made of the employer's requirements to that board subcommittee, which appears, but we're not quite clear, to have approved those employer's requirements.
Right.
Let me move on, Ms. McLeod. What structures did you set up or operate to ensure that the clinical teams had input into the design and construction of the hospital?
So the management of York Hill, so the Children's Hospital, they had a management team. So I would approach them or Jamie Redfern, who was the general manager, to get nominations for the people I wished to liaise with to take forward the design.
And so these are the user group meetings.
These user groups.
To what extent did you have any involvement in processes to ensure that the technical aspects of the building were checked by the clinicians at York Hill and the managers at York Hill so they met their standards?
That wasn't my remit. Mine was spatial. I don't have that expertise, that technical information, that knowledge.
How would the system you've described ensure that patient safety is protected?
In terms of infection control, or at the user group meeting, there would be myself there, Fiona McCluskey, who was the nurse lead for the team, Jackie Balmonroy, who was the infection control nurse for the team, Francis Rath would be there for Capital, and David Hall was there from Curry and Brown.
Now, Francis Rath has just told us this morning that the user group meetings didn't discuss ventilation.
No, it didn't.
So how were the IPC implications of ventilation decisions discussed with the clinicians and managers at York Hill?
It wasn't. We took the design to them being satisfied spatially and location-wise for the 1 to 200s, and then for the room layouts, and then it went to our technical team, which would be the management, the mechanical engineering and plumbing.
So who was the mechanical engineering and plumbing advisor to the project that you led in 2010?
There was a few technical advisors. I can't remember the name of them all, but
well, let's go back a bit and we'll work it through. So in 2009, what I understand is to be called stage one, before the contract signed. Can you remember the name of the healthcare planners who were consulting or
Buchan Associates?
And who were the name of the architects who was consulting to the health board?
HLM, I think.
And who were the name of the M&E engineers who were helping the health board?
I don't know.
Might it have been a company called Wallace Whittle?
It could have been,
right.
Yes.
We then look after contract close into 2010 and what we understand is the reviewable design period.
Mm-hmm.
Were there any healthcare consultants involved advising the health board? Was Buchan still involved?
2009.
In 10?
10. I think they were in the background. If we needed them, we could call on them, but I don't think by that time we used them.
Was HLM available in 2010?
Yes, they were available in the same way. I think they were slightly more involved, my recollection.
Was Wallace Whittle involved in 2010?
I wouldn't be at the meetings that Wallace Whittle would be at.
And in 2011 onwards, into what's called stage 3, were those 3 consultants involved in any way?
Certainly, I think we used Buchan's because we were having issues getting the flow to work in the theatre complex in the Children's Hospital, because we had patients, clinicians, and we also had parents. So we really were getting in a bit of a jumble, and they came to assist with that to facilitate the meeting. But apart from that, I don't remember.
What was the role of Curry and Brown in 2000?
They were. David Hall was at all the meetings.
And what role did he hold?
I understood that he took back any concerns and information that required ventilation, for example, and all these things.
To whom did he take them?
He took them to that project exec meeting. So they had a meeting weekly, I think it was, a technical team meeting weekly, and issues that had come up at the user meetings were discussed at those meetings.
You see, his position in his statement is that, and indeed Carrie Brown's corporate position, is that soon after contract close, the end of 2009, those consultants, Buckens, HLM, and whatever, were stood down and had no further involvement in the hospital in 2010 or 11. How would you respond to that?
I may be wrong about the date of the discussions round about theatres, but they certainly disappeared. I
Yeah, so
only
who
remember
was
coming
providing?
back at that.
And I realise it
stage.
wasn't your direct responsibility according to your version of your system of the structure, but in those, what is it now, 10, 11, in the 5 years of the construction period, who was providing technical advice on M&E to NHS Greater Glasgow in the procurement of the Royal Hospital for Children, for which you were project manager?
I don't know. I don't know. I presumed I presumed they were sitting around the meeting with the technical teams and advising the board, and during their discussions with Multiplex, or Brookfield as we called them at that point.
So would you have attended these weekly meetings?
No. But they would occasionally come out and ask for further information, or I didn't go to the meetings.
Just a moment, so I'll just check a document. Okay. Can I take you to well, I want to check it's the right document. I think you've already sent it to us, but we look at bundle 43, volume 6, document 49. Yes, that one, please. So this seems to be an email from you to colleagues in Edinburgh on 23rd of October 2013. Did you have an opportunity to look at this?
No.
It was on your documents. Do you remember sending an email like this?
Yes, we did have a lot of discussion and a few meetings with the Edinburgh team.
Yes, and so it appears that you've sent some job descriptions.
Yeah.
And you see how you say in the second paragraph of your first email, I've also attached the job descriptions I have. Most are pretty historic, written on appointment to the design stage, but they might be of some assistance. I wonder if we can go to page 1015, which appears to be your job description.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see that?
Yes.
Now, if we look at this job purpose, it seems to be rather wider than simply managing the connection with the spatial planning. Would that be a fair description?
Yes, that would be fair.
Okay. And you see how the project is described as £100 million then in capital costs. The second last paragraph?
Mm-hmm.
We go on to the next page.
Yes.
And the description of what Glasgow has. Then there's the phases. Now on to the next page, please. And then there's the structure. And do you see how in this structure, this organisation, which dates back to when the project was being started, external and internal support is supposed to report to the two project managers and not to the project director?
Yeah.
Did it?
No.
No. Go on the next page, please. Now, I'm assuming the role of the department is the whole of the project team. That paragraph, section 5, isn't just you it's talking about here, it's talking about
No, it's
the whole team. And then 6 key areas. Now, I wonder if we could just look for a moment at E. Set up and maintain appropriate structures to lead, manage and coordinate the development and implementation program to design, procure, construct and commission the new children's hospital. Was that part of your job description?
No, not once. Not once I was in post. No.
So who was doing that?
Well, I was doing some of it, so I would be doing the design.
But not the ventilation system or the water system?
No.
No. So who was doing the rest?
Well, that would be the technical team. So that would be Alan and Alan Seaborn and Peter Moyer, and I I understood that it was the board's technical advisors with Brookfield.
But of course, Brookfield were the contractor.
Mm-hmm.
Could it be that the team was relying on technical advice from Brookfield's technical advisors?
Well, I don't know because I wasn't at those meetings.
Okay, over the next page, please. Do you see M? Coordinate the formulation of the clinical output specifications, including the whole hospital model, clinical agencies aggregation, and departmental clinical operational policies. Did you do all that role?
Yes, mostly, yeah.
Mostly? So were you involved in formulating the clinical output specifications?
Yes.
Okay. And you seem to have ticked it, or someone's ticked it. I think it might be the person in Edinburgh who's done the ticking, so maybe it's not you.
It wasn't me.
Let's move on to the next page. And then it reports to whom you report. And then the most challenging part of the job. And then over the final page. And did you meet the qualifications?
Yes.
Yes, but you applied for this job.
I applied for this job.
I'll take it off the screen. How did you react when it became clear that you weren't being asked to do all of what was described in the job description for the job you'd applied for?
Well, initially, I was. My expectation was I would be more involved in all meetings, but then I wasn't. But once the project developed, I realised the workload that was involved, and therefore I didn't really have time to think about being at other meetings.
Right. Can we go back to this document, please? Sorry. No, sorry, I've already asked that question. We don't need to go back to it. Now, what I want to do is, did you receive any particular project management training or training about the form of procurement that was being chosen for this hospital?
We had a workshop just to explain, because I had done a PFI previously, so it was a bit more of a collaborative way of working. So
why do you say it was a
more
more collaborative way of working?
That was the model that I understood we were going down. It was a more collaborative type of procurement where we worked with the.
And what was the form of the procurement called in this case?
Well, it was what was the word? It was a government funded, so.
Was it a design and build
It's
contract?
a design build. That's the one. Yeah.
Had you previously worked on a contract involving the NEC3 standard form contract?
No, I hadn't until this.
Had you received any training about how it works?
Well, not training. I mean, I wouldn't claim to be an expert on it, and I didn't need to be, but we understood what the principles were and how the project was going to operate.
So, given that you hold a job title of project manager, I think it's important that I ask you this question. Can you explain to the inquiry the role of the project manager in an NEC3 standard form construction contract?
I wasn't a project manager in NEC. I was a NHS project manager.
And what do you see as the differences?
I was employed by Greater Glasgow Health Board as a project manager, not in terms of construction or technical knowledge.
How would the other professionals involved in this project, the architects, Brookfield staff itself, its subcontractors, its consultants, know that you weren't a project manager in their terms and that you were a project manager in a different way?
I don't know, you'd need to ask them that, because when we would be at the meeting, it would become quite apparent that my role was, well, I would only be going to meetings within my role. I wouldn't be going to other meetings, so.
But if someone's saying, well, I will have to ask them, of course we will. But if you're talking to someone who's works in multiplex, for example, who does a particular job for them, turns up on the project, is there for a few years, and they come across people called the project manager, why wouldn't they be entitled to assume that you're a project manager in their minds? In NEC3, this is an NEC3 contract.
Yeah. Okay, I know what you're saying, but that's not the way the health service worked. I was working on this project to manage it, not an NEC.
And not the whole
project
thing,
manager.
just parts of it.
No, just parts of it.
Were you aware of, when you joined the project, was Mr. Seaborn already in post?
Yes.
And was Mr. Moyer already in post?
Yes.
So who was planned to be, by any definition, the project manager of the project after contract close when you first joined?
I don't know.
So was it going to be Mr. Seaborn or Mr. Moyer, or was it going to be an external company brought in to provide management services? Was that ever discussed?
Not to my knowledge. No.
No. What?
Sorry, you're using project manager in this context as sort of capital P, capital M under,
Yes, so
under the NEC3.
I think what I'm asking, because you candidly explain you don't know what the job involves for an NEC contract, is that if we think of 2008, 2009, was there ever any discussion in the meetings that you were at about how the project was going to be managed once the contract had been signed with Brookfield?
No.
Was there any discussion of what somebody refers to in a document as a one-team approach? I think Mr. Loudon calls it that at some point. No.
I don't recognise that term.
Okay. Now, can you explain the role of the NEC3 supervisor in an NEC standard form construction contract?
No.
Who was the NEC3 supervisor on this project?
I thought that was Curran Brown, but that might be wrong.
What were Capita doing on this project?
Okay. I can't recall.
Did you come across their staff?
Not particularly, no. No.
Could it be that Capita had staff on site who in some way were checking that the building was built correctly?
They could be, yes. They didn't come into my way of working, so I was aware of Capita, but I couldn't tell you what they did. Perhaps at that time I could, but I can't recall.
So I'd like to look at the Acute Services Review Programme Board governance changes in February 2010. So we look at Bundle 30, Document 6 at page 45. And this is the project team.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you are described as a member of the project team.
Yeah.
Were you a member of the project team?
Was I a member? Yes.
And it met weekly?
It met on a Friday, yes.
So what was the other weekly meeting that you weren't at?
It was a technical team with Brookfield.
The next page?
Multiplex.
Were you a member of the NCH project group?
Yes.
And that meant monthly?
Yes.
Right. Next one, please. But the users groups, you would have attended some of those, or were you sent Francis Rath?
I attended all of those for the Children's Hospital.
Can we go back to 44, please? So this is the joint project steering group, which doesn't involve you.
That's right.
And this met monthly. So is this the one you're talking about?
No, there was another meeting that was held weekly with some of these people, I think. I didn't attend.
So the reason I ask this is that this document, if you look in the top right-hand corner, is mentioned as being the ASR program board, which approved it, we think, on the 19th of February 2010. And this is the governance structure for the whole project.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're saying there was a meeting that took place weekly that wasn't in the governance structure?
But it reported to that group.
But the big group that reported that group was the one you were in, the next document, page 45.
No, that was the project team. That was just an NHS one. This is a
Yeah, so
involvement.
is it not, am I wrong here? I mean, I've understood this whole document is that the document on the next page, page 45, please, the project team, of which you were a member, reported to the document on the previous page, page 44, the joint project steering group, in some way.
No. We had discussions that were then taken to the project team, the internal project team, had discussions, and issues that we had were taken by Alan and Peter to that joint project steering group.
I'm just going to just check where I am, because I don't want to jump around too much. So allow me a moment just to get a document in front of me. If we go to page 38, please. This is the organogram from February 2010. And I see we have the project team. Actually, I was wrong, reporting to the Acute Services Strategy Board Executive Subgroup, which is on page 41. What was that meeting?
That was that's an exec meeting of senior officers of the board.
So that's not the technical meeting you're talking about?
No.
Right, okay. We'll go back to 38, please. And if we look at the joint project steering group, do you see that it has a number of groups reporting to it?
Yeah.
Including the project management group. So if we go to I wonder if there is on this diagram is the meeting that you say took place weekly and discussed technical matters.
Construction interface group.
The construction interface group, that's what you think it was?
Yes.
So one thing that intrigues me about that is, I'll just ask my colleagues in the next room to see if we've got a minute of the construction interface group I can put to you. But if the technical design group, which is bundle 40, and it is bundle 40, first meeting is page 354, document 119. Now, did you attend these ones? There are 11 of them. You're not at the first one, but you're mentioned as an apologies.
Yeah. Yes,
and then if we go on to the next one, which is on the page 358, we have you attending.
Technical design meeting, yeah.
So do you remember going to the technical design groups?
I hadn't until you've brought that up.
The reason I ask you is because what's interesting about these minutes is there are 11 of them. Eventually they become the medical planning and technical design group. Does that ring a bell?
No, it doesn't, but the groups changed all the time and we evolved as the
these
project
groups
went on.
only happened in 2010 as part of the reviewable design period.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you can help me with one particular oddity about these minutes. Which if you go to page 362, which is in the same meeting, the second meeting, Do you see how item 7.09, there is an item called M&E design?
Yes.
So this is the technical design group. And if we go through all the minutes of that meeting that year, there is never anything in the M&E design field. You're nodding.
Yes, because we wouldn't have that information. I wouldn't be. It'd be the wrong group for that discussion.
Well, it's called the technical design group. Going back to page 358. And there's a representative from the architects there, and 2 people from Brookfield. Mr. Hall is there. Mr. Seaborn's there.
Mm-hmm.
Why wouldn't the technical design group discuss technical design?
I don't recall. I don't know why. I think it was discussed elsewhere.
Because this is the problem. We can't find anywhere else it's discussed.
Can you not?
And obviously the construction interface group is of interest.
Mm-hmm.
But and we'll look at that. Who do you think? I've already asked that question, I won't repeat it. Let's move to the user group process. We'll take that off the screen.
Okay.
Ms. Rath talked about the user groups this morning.
Yeah.
What did you understand the function of the user group meetings to be?
To do the spatial design for the hospital.
And not to do technical ventilation or water matters? No. Can I ask you to look at an email that you might have sent in April 2010? That's bundle 43, volume 5, document 26, page 160. So this appears to be an email sent by you to the lead architect, copying in Francis Rath, Heather Griffin, Peter Moyer, Mark Baird, and David Bowen, I think, but we've redacted his email address. And it's called the 1 to 50 room program, and you set out details for both the adult and the children's hospital. So did you deal with both hospitals at times?
No, I didn't. I'm not sure why.
So if you look at that first bullet, we will include the general wards, but not hemato-oncology. Most rooms in hemato-oncology will have the same layout as general wards, with the addition of the HEPA filter. For children's, we'll look at cardiology. So that first bullet point reads like you're talking about what will become Ward 4B.
Yeah, it does. It does.
And then the third from the bottom of that list, dermatology OPD. There wasn't a separate dermatology department at Children's Hospital, was there?
No.
No. So were you involved in user group administration of both the adult and the children's
I
hospital?
wasn't, but I don't know why. We must have been putting the two things together, and I was the scribe for that meeting. But I must have had input from Heather, and see she's copied in on it.
So if there is
that.
I mean, I don't know whether it's fair to say this, but if you look at the first bullet point, we will include the general wards, but not hemato-oncology. Most rooms in hemato-oncology will have the same layout as the general wards with the addition of the HEPA filter. Where are you getting that information from, do you think? Because you're not a technical person, you just said that.
No. So I'm taking from that. I can't remember the context that's come up in.
Well, there's an email from Emma White below. She's trying to sort the timetable out.
I think it was just the timetable gets sorted out, and I'm telling her how we as a project team are going to do that.
Because one way to read that email, Ms. McLeod, is that you at that point were perfectly happy to find out from somewhere that hemato-oncology adult was to have some form of special ventilation, and to attempt to describe that to Ms. White in an email.
Yeah, but that was information that we'd obviously, I would assume, had discussed at a project team, and I had to respond to the architects in terms of what that programme would be.
Yes, but doesn't that demonstrate that you were involved in passing on information about technical matters?
No.
Well, you are passing on information of technical
No, I'm
methodology.
not. I'm just explaining how we are going to process it. I'm not saying I personally will be doing.
I'm not saying you're saying that, Ms. McLeod, but I'm saying that you are passing on to the architect in those brackets what amounts to something like an explanation of how they're to design the ventilation of that ward. And that's a technical matter.
Yeah, because I don't understand what a HEPA filter is. So I'm explaining that that's what we are expecting to be doing. But that's
But where are
not me
you getting the
personally
information
doing it.
from?
With the project team, I would imagine. I think there's been a meeting with myself and Heather and Peter to discuss how we were going to respond to Emma's request, and I've been the scribe for that.
Okay, let's look at bundle 43, volume 5, page 591. Now, this is a user group meeting for the, well, I think it's user group for agenda for adult. Do you see how each of the days are heading adult? This is for the 16th of May, 17th of May, 19th of May, and the 20th of May. And there's meetings going to take place in the office in the Hargate Road, and the board membership is written down on the left-hand side, and you are described as the second attendee. Mm-hmm. So could it be you were attending adult user group meetings as well?
No, I wouldn't be.
We can go back to volume 43, volume 1. This might well have signatures. So what we're going to do here, Mr. McLeod, is we're going to show this document to you, but we're not going to put it on the YouTube feed because it might have a signature on it. Okay. It is bundle 43, volume 1, document 25, page 100. So this appears to be, well, what is this? Have you signed it personally?
I can't see my signature there.
If it's not you, that's we can still ask you questions, but I appreciate that.
No, I can't see my signature there. No.
Would you ever have signed design acceptance documents like this?
For the 1 to 200s, yes.
Yes. So I appreciate this isn't your one, but just thinking about this. This is a 1 to 200 design acceptance form for hermeto-oncology. I'm assuming that the project manager signature there is probably Miss Griffin's.
It looks like Heather's, yes.
So it would therefore be an adult hermeto-oncology. It would make sense.
Yes.
But if it was a pediatric place, you'd have signed it normally. Yes. And you wouldn't be the only signer because you'd have a signature from the infection control lead and the facilities management lead. So it's Miss Stewart and Karen Connolly. Yeah. Now.
Yes.
How are the architects supposed to know that you've not approved the technical aspects of the design when you sign these documents?
Because they wouldn't be on the drawings. These are the 1 to 200 drawings.
So these wouldn't be about just spatial. No. That's the okay. We'll take it off the screen. I think I might just go back to something to check I've covered it properly with you. This is page 293 of your statement, or statement bundle. It's your answer to question 6D. Now, we were just talking about this group that you thought might be the construction interface group. You've used a different name here. So you see at D, you were asked, how were designs approved for construction? Who signed off the agreed design? And you said, as you just explained, the spatial designs were signed off by myself as project manager, the clinical lead for the user group, and the infection control nurse. Jackie agreed the room adjacencies were appropriate in terms of infection control compliance. The MEP mechanical, electrical and plumbing design for each department and room layout were developed by the MEP group. I was not a member of this group. So you can't help us about who was in the MEP group?
I'm just using that as a general term, the mechanical, electrical and plumbing group. And that would be, well, that would actually probably have been the project exec that you were talking about.
The construction interface group that we thought?
No, the one above that, the board that Alan and Brookfield were sitting in.
So your position is that if we go back to bundle 30 and at page 44, your position is the joint project steering group would be approving all the mechanical, electrical and plumbing aspects of the hospital?
No, that's probably not right either. There must have been a group that fed into that did that.
Sorry, Miss McLeod. I think
So there must have been
allowed your voice to sort of.
Sorry, there must have been a group that reported that information into that, and as I wasn't a member of it, I can't recall what the name of it was.
So you remember the technical design group, but it wasn't that.
But we didn't discuss that.
Yeah. There was a design and healthy environment strategy group. Does that ring a bell?
Design healthy.
Environment strategy group.
I can't remember that term.
Okay, there was a joint commissioning group. Or maybe it's not important. Let's let's go to page 50 of bundle 30, please. Remember we looked at the meetings of the technical design group from 2010?
Yep. Yes.
Which you'll remember. That's the middle column. It's yellow.
Yes.
And you see the membership is described, and
yes.
Darren Smith from Brookfield is the lead.
Yes.
Now, let's look at the remit. Ensure the planning application submitted in time. So maybe that's not important today. And so let's move on to the fourth one down. Monitor design compliance with the ERs and the CPs. What are the ERs?
The employer's requirements.
And what are the CPs?
Can't recall that term.
And monitor design sign-off. Monitor progress of key design strategies, fire, access control, acoustics. Manage any derogations from employers' requirements and CPs. How could it... Surely this group is designed to discuss technical design matters. Or have I misunderstood?
You can see from the minute we didn't.
Well, I can see from the minute you didn't, but looks like this is the group that's supposed to do it.
But we didn't.
And if we actually look at the construction interface group, which is the group that you felt might have met weekly, do you see in blue? Its membership, it doesn't include Mr. Moyer and Mr. Seaborn, doesn't really engage with technical matters, does it?
No, when I look at that group in that diagram, that interface group was the group that was the interface of all the projects on the campus. So that was my mistake.
Right, okay, but then it might have been, could it have been the project management group that you're talking about, the one in green?
No, no, that doesn't look like a group that would talk about mechanical and engineering.
Because the reason that I'm pressing you is that Miss Rath gave evidence this morning that when she signed off the room data sheets for the children's hospital, the environmental page wasn't checked by her.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right. And she was told by Mr. Moyer and Mr. Hall that it all been checked, it was all fine.
That's right.
But you can't point to where it was done.
No. There was, I'm sure there was another group.
Right. Now let's turn to guidance. So this is question 7 of your witness statement, the bottom of page 293, where we were before. We asked you to explain the purpose of the guidance relied upon by the design team and why it was important. Now, it's a very wide question, but the answer you responded with was the team used the health building notes, HBNs, or the Scottish health building notes if they existed. This was important as it gave the room requirements and specifications for health buildings in the UK and Scotland. How familiar were you with HBNs and SHBNs?
If I had to look at an HBN, I'd be looking at what rooms were expected to be in that department. So if it was an emergency department, what rooms would generally be in that room and how many for the patient population going through that department.
So would you, for example, have ever looked at HBN 04001, which sent out the specifications of isolation rooms?
The specification for isolation
Yes.
rooms. In terms of spatial, yes, but not in terms of technical.
So even though there's a sort of caveat in there that it's not suitable for immunocompromised patients, you wouldn't read that bit?
I wouldn't have that knowledge. I would expect my infection control nurses colleagues to have that information. They were the people who would advise on an isolation room, why it was required and how many we would need.
See, Mr. Walsh, I think Mr. Vine, have been quite clear that the infection control nurses have no expertise in ventilation of water. Is that something you've heard before?
In terms of water, no, I'm talking about in terms of number and the function of an isolation room. I would expect infection control to tell me why they needed that.
No, but you specifically said, Ms. McLeod, infection control nurses. And Mr. Walsh, who was the infection control manager at the time, was very clear in his evidence that he does not consider that infection control nurses have competence in ventilation. So you couldn't have relied on, if he's right, you couldn't have relied on infection control nurses to tell you about isolation rooms.
Only in terms of how many I need and what the function of that room would be in terms of the patient population. I wouldn't expect Jackie McLeod to tell me it needs whatever it needs.
Would she be able to tell you which sort of isolation room would be appropriate for that patient group?
Only in terms of the numbers, no.
So would she be able to describe the difference between a positive pressure ventilated lobby room and a negative pressure room? She would. Can you do that?
I could at that time because I heard other people talking about it, but it's not my knowledge sphere.
Can you explain to us why the isolation rooms in the Schehallien unit were all built as positive pressure ventilated lobby rooms when that turns out possibly not to have been the right sort of room?
I couldn't tell you that.
When did you first become aware that might have been a problem?
I didn't know that was a problem until you've told me.
Now, you mentioned in your answer to question 7 HBNs and SHBNs. Did you ever have any dealing with Scottish Health Technical Memoranda, SHTMs, and Health Technical Memorandums, HTMs?
Only in terms of reading about numbers and throughput. I wouldn't read other parts because that wasn't what I was looking at when I was doing the Children's Hospital.
So who was checking that, for example, the right wards were defined as neutropenic wards in terms of SHTM 0301?
Well, I understood that was Peter Moyer and David Hall and that team.
Right. Now, if you look at answer 9, which is on the next page, at page 294, you're asked quite a long question. Describe the intended use and purpose of the following wards, 2A, 2B. What guidance was considered in the design of the wards? What processes were in place to ensure compliance? Were there any changes to design during design and build? If so, please describe any such changes. Describe the impact, if any, on the guidance compliance, and describe the sign-off processes for any such changes or involvement and how any changes were communicated to the board. Was external advice I'm assuming advice ever sought in respect to the design changes. Now, firstly, my apologies for asking you a terrible question, that we shouldn't have asked you the question that long. That was a mistake on our part. But your answer contains an interesting sentence. You start by, I am unable to recall the name for the HBN used for the design of wards 2A and 2B. The process of the sign-off, 1 to 200s and 1 to 50 layouts, was signed off by myself, the infection control nurse on the team, and the clinical lead for the RHC. To the best of my recollection, there was no deviation from the HBN in terms of the layouts. So is that you distinguishing between no deviation from the HBN in terms of, say, ventilation?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Mr. McIntosh, you're using the term HBN. Ms. McLeod has, I think, already explained that she has a familiarity with the SHTMs. Are you distinguishing between the building notes and the technical memoranda?
I'm using HBN deliberately because, my lord, in the answer to question 7, Ms. McLeod referred to HBNs then on the previous page. If you just jump back to page 293.
Right. So I should be thinking about building notes.
We're talking about building notes, yes, Lord. I'm assuming you're talking about building notes here.
Yes,
yes, because this is the spatial aspect you're focusing
yes,
on. Right. And the point you want us to understand is that you think that the room adjacencies and layout was in compliance with HBN and SHBN.
With in terms of yes.
But you're not able to tell us whether the rooms were built in accordance with the ventilation aspects of HBN or SHTM 0301.
No, I can tell you that.
Well, what I want to do now is talk about something called BREAM, which you deal with on page 295 in question 11. Now, we asked you a question, what, if any, role BREAM played in the acceptance of the design? And you responded, I was not involved in any BREAM meetings. So that wasn't quite what we asked you. Is that BREAM something you'd heard of in the project?
Yes, I heard about it, yes.
So do you know what role BREAM played in the acceptance of this design?
It was it was about environmental and yeah.
Were you involved in the evaluation of the bids?
At procurement?
Yeah.
Only the clinical design.
And that's the spatial stuff again?
That's the spatial stuff again. We looked at the proposed designs from the bidders, and we checked that they worked for myself and Morgan Jameson, who was the medical director for the Children's Hospital at that time, looked with Fiona McCluskey at just ensuring that that design would meet the needs of the Children's Hospital. But
So you were doing one particular aspect of it?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I'd like you to look at an email. Well, firstly, let's look at an answer. Go back to the top of this page. We asked you a question about sign-off processes for technical requirements, and you took the position 12 on top of this page. I'm unable to comment as I was not involved in technical requirements for the rooms. Can I ask you to look at an email McLeod appears to have sent on the 14th of June 2013? So that's bundle 14, volume 1, page 32. So this is an email seemingly sent by Mr. Andes to Mr. Walsh and Miss McNee, and she describes a meeting between her, Craig Williams, Miss Stewart, Fiona McCluskey, and you about the design plan to the new Children's Hospital.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
yes.
Lots of questions that come out of this. I'll start with the first one. If we think of 2013, this is during the construction period, isn't it?
Yes.
Do you remember attending any meetings with Professor Williams about the Children's Hospital design before this meeting?
Yes.
Can you help us even approximately when they might have been?
It must have been early on. It must have been 2007, 8.
Might there have been any meetings with Professor Williams between, for the Children's Hospital that you were aware of, between contract close and this meeting in June 2013?
I can't recall any. I can't
Now,
recall any.
I'm absolutely clear that this is obviously not your email. This is Mr. Andy's email. And to be fair to her, she doesn't remember sending it. What I'm wondering is, in this process, do you see how it says in the penultimate section of the first big block of text, we discussed mechanically ventilated isolation rooms?
Yeah.
How could you have been in a conversation about mechanically ventilated isolation rooms given what you've described in your technical involvement?
I couldn't be.
Why might you have been in this meeting at all then?
She'd met with us. Yeah.
She'd met with you. Well, five of you had met together.
I remember having a meeting, but I couldn't remember discussing ventilated isolation rooms.
Because she's saying how Craig asked for information on airflows in and out of the three-wall cubicles in the main emergency department. And the discussion of the mechanically ventilated isolation rooms.
Yeah. It seems a very odd membership to discuss that.
Well, is it? I mean, it's the lead infection control doctor, a nurse consultant who is going to go on, or she probably doesn't know this at this point, to set up the infection control team for the Children's Hospital. Jackie Stewart, who had at some point been the infection control nurse on the project, Fiona McCluskey, who was the lead nurse, and you, who's the project director.
Project manager.
Project manager. Is it not a sensible sort of meeting?
To discuss, yes, but to discuss mechanically ventilated isolation rooms seems very odd.
Okay. What I want to do now is to jump back to your statement, so page 295. Could this be the meeting you're talking about in your answer to question 13? The project team infection control nurse, Jackie Balmroy from the RHC, Craig Williams and Pamela Yandes. There was at least one meeting by recollection as Jackie discussed the design with infection control colleagues, and these views were brought to user group meetings. I can't recall the date of final design sign-off. Could it be you're talking about the same meeting, or am I pushing you too much?
I think that's pushing it too much.
Okay, fair enough. What I want you to do is look at Bundle 46, Volume 1, Document 16, page 98. This is an email from you in July 2014. It's to Janice Hughes. Who was Janice Hughes?
She was the planning manager. I'm just trying to remember what the name was. Planning manager for the Women and Children's Directorate.
Right. And so the final message from you is express a technical viewpoint. Barrier is created by HEPA filtered supply to lobby with extract from isolation room en suite. Therefore, no cross-infection between the room and corridor in either direction. Reversal to create positive lobby is not possible, as no extract to lobby and no supply in isolation rooms en suite. How could you have sent that message?
Somebody gave me that information.
Who might that have been?
I would say it was David Hall.
You'd think it was David Hall?
Yeah.
Okay. Because if we go back a page 99 rather, and we're on to page 100. Right, I think this is the start of the thread. So Janice Hughes emails you with a list of, she's obviously spoken to, it says discussed. So obviously there's been a phone call. Don't remember this phone call?
I met regularly with Janice, to be honest.
Okay, so she sent you a list.
Unusual.
Let's go to the next page, 99. So you reply, there are 8 HEPA filtered isolation rooms within the unit, and you give the code numbers for them all. And these are positive pressure with separate air handling units for each individual room. They're not positive pressure isolation rooms, are they? They're positive pressure ventilated lobby rooms.
Yes, I suppose they are, yeah. Well,
Is
the
that
bedroom-
important as a difference?
Well, there's a bedroom above, so I would, reading that now, I would think the HEPA filtered isolation room was the bedroom, the SHC1.
What's the difference, Miss McLeod, between a positive pressure ventilated lobby room and a positive pressure isolation room?
So the lobby leads into the room, so there's a kind of a almost a small area before you go into the actual isolation room.
What use would you make of a positive pressure room as opposed to a positive pressure ventilated lobby room?
It was designed so that one door would close and the other door. I can't remember whether it's positive or negative airflows, but you would come in off the corridor, go into the ante room, that door would be closed. My recollection is there's hand washing facilities in that room, and then you would go into the isolation room. That would make sure the airflow couldn't go through.
So what direction would in these rooms, what direction would the air be flowing?
Well, that's what I don't know. I would have been able to tell you at the time, but I can't remember.
Because the reason I'm asking you, Ms. McLeod, is because a positive pressure room is, I understand it, different from a positive pressure ventilated lobby room, and the airflow is in a different direction.
Right.
Is that something you have known?
I would have known that at that time.
So why did you tell Janice that this was a positive pressure room? Because they aren't.
That must have been what I was told.
Okay.
Because I wouldn't know that. I would have that information at that time, but I would get it.
So she then sends the message on to Alana McVeigh. Who's Alana McVeigh?
I don't know who she is.
But she copies in Brenda Gibson and Coral Brady and Jamie Redfern.
Yes.
So are they relying on what you're sending?
Yes.
Right. And then they ask a question. Do you want to ask if it's possible to have a negative pressure rooms of source isolation? And then they ask that question at 9:12 on the 1st of July. Do you know what a negative pressure isolation room is?
Not now, but at that time I would have had some information that gave me the information to pass that on.
Okay, so on the 1st of July you get that question at 9:12. Let's look at page 98. 3 minutes later, they send it on to you, and then you get the email, and you reply half an hour later. So do you see how you've got an email on the 1st of July at 9:15?
Yes. And
you reply half an hour later, my understanding is that it's possible, but it's through the building management system, not sure why I'd want to. And the lobby is positive, and therefore ensuring that both the bedroom and the corridor are protected with the air being vented to the lobby's air handling unit. That seems to be your voice. You didn't go and get advice, surely?
I did.
In that half hour?
David Hall was 2 doors along from me.
Okay. How would you react if someone suggested that's not necessarily accurate?
I was passing on information I was given by a technical person, so I would go with my notepad and he would tell me and I would reply that.
And then on the 1st of July at 12, the same day, just before lunch, Janice Hughes replies and she explains that they need to change rooms between patients for different needs. And they ask for a technical opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And you reply 3 hours later at 3:08 with the technical viewpoint email. So you're saying that would have come from, who would that come from, that technical viewpoint?
I think it would be David Hall I would go to.
Okay. I wonder if this morning, I rather unfairly gave you some documents I found only this morning, which are the extension of this email. I wonder if we can go to bundle 46, volume 3, document 5. So this is a little bit earlier. So this is in February 2013. And this is Coral Brady in exchange with you. Now, if we just go, she's sending you in 2013 an email Hi, Mairi, you may recall this email trail from a couple of years ago. And it's obvious that the senior SCT team, they were discussing the HEPA filtration in the transplant rooms, and they had some issues. Now, back in 2011, on the 19th of September, you said there were 8 isolation rooms. If you go on to the next page, do you see how you sent an email on 29th of August 2011?
Yes.
And you say, the plans for the hemato-oncology area of the National Children's Hospital include HEPA filter and pressure as necessary. When we're further in design, we'll contact staff as and when required. We do, however, have a full NHS technical team supported by external technical advisors who are aware of the building requirements of the unit. Now, so the question is, who are the technical team?
David Hall and the external advisors.
Who's the NHS technical team?
Well, we're health service managers. We're not a technical team.
I realise that, but you just told Coral. Who does Coral work for?
She worked in the Schahalian unit. She was their business manager.
You just told the business manager of the Shahad unit that we do have a full NHS technical team. Who were those people?
I can't remember what that. I would have thought that would be at that time.
Because the difficulty here, Mr. McLeod, is that this is at a point when it is Frances Rath's evidence that she is signing off room data sheets without checking the environmental page because David Hall and Mr. Moyer have told her they're all good. And we need to know who the technical team are, who's accountable for that decision.
Yeah.
But you can't help us.
I can't help you.
Well, my recollection is, and I may be wrong about this, Mr. McIntosh, that it wasn't that the room data sheets were good, but it wasn't her responsibility.
That's a fair point, my lord. It was that she didn't need to worry about them because they've been checked by others.
Yeah.
But you can't help us who the technical team is.
No.
The first sentence is interesting as well of that paragraph. The plans for the hemato-oncology area in the National Children's Hospital include HEPA filter and pressure as necessary. What do you think pressure as necessary would have meant?
Depending whether they needed negative or positive pressure.
Would you know?
No.
Who would know?
Peter and David Hall.
Who else in NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde at that point would have known what pressure regime is required in the isolation rooms in the Schahalian unit?
I suppose the people who are running the hospital.
Yes, so
The
Professor Gibson might know.
team. Well, the technical capital team over at York Hill rather than Brenda, I would have thought.
Might Professor Jones, Doctor Who, later became Doctor Who, might they have known?
I don't know that name.
Because the next thing, when we are further in the design, we'll contact staff as and when required. Now, if the room data sheets that Ms. Rath signed, having been told she didn't need to worry about the environmental sheets, are a correct statement of the design in 2011, at this point, those isolation rooms have been defined as positive pressure ventilated lobby rooms. Would that make sense to you?
Can't recall.
Because what I'm suggesting is that when you send this email, the die has been cast. These are already the wrong rooms. And you're telling people, we'll contact you later. How is that listening to the clinicians?
Because that was the advice I was given, was that that information would be fully discussed and implemented later on.
From the point of view of the architect, if the room data sheet has been signed, that's good to go for the next design stage, isn't it?
I don't know what their processes were, so couldn't comment.
But their position is that once you get a sign back
Right.
of a particular design stage, they can go on to the next design stage.
Uh-huh.
Yes, right. So if documents have been signed by Ms. Rath on behalf of the board that include what turn out to be inaccurate
I see.
information in 2011, it gets harder to fix it, doesn't it?
It does.
It does. And in this email, you're effectively saying to the business manager of the Chehan unit, you don't need to worry about this at this point.
So that was what I was told. That,
But you're the project manager of the Children's Hospital.
yes, of the spatial design.
Of the special zone. I wonder if we can go to page 777. In fact, let's not go to 777. Let's go to 717 because I can't write my own handwriting. That's one of the problems there. We've already been there. Let's look at an email that I think you might have sent to Mr. McLeod from Health Facilities Scotland. So that's the same bundle, but it's document 6, page 716. No, it's not page 716. Let me just get that right. Allow me a moment just to get the right document in my hand. Yes, it's page 719, sorry. So this appears to be an email from you to Eddie McLeod at HFS, who gave evidence in our last block of hearings, copied to Ms. Griffin and Peter Moyer on the 26th of March 2013. It's a detailed note about the isolation rooms. Would you have written this?
Yeah, I think I pulled it together, yes.
Yeah. Does it explain what sort of isolation rooms they are?
No, just isolation rooms.
Is that an oversight of any importance?
I don't know why he'd asked, what the question was he asked.
Well, let's go to the next page. And the next page, we go back, we don't have it. What we do have is the first sentence of your email, which just says, please find below the process followed for Adult and Children's Hospital. And you assert that infection control involved throughout the project, with a nurse seconded to the team, who's linked back to the board infection control nurse. And I think it's a different nurse because it might have been a net ranking, but she was fully involved in the competitive dialogue process with the 3 bidders who bid to build the new hospitals and participated in all the user group meetings with the schedules of accommodation, the 1 to 2 departmental layout drawings and the 1 to 50 room layout drawings were agreed. Now, you just told us that these user group meetings didn't discuss technical matters.
But we didn't. All we are saying is how many isolation rooms. So some of those isolation rooms aren't bone marrow. They're just an isolation room within a ward for enhanced infection control.
Yes, but you've just said in your first sentence that you're describing the process followed for the isolation rooms. And in the next paragraph, you've reassured Mr. McLeod that, in this case, Ms. Stewart, has been involved in the user group meetings. But in your evidence about an hour ago, you said the user group meetings didn't discuss technical matters like ventilation.
But we didn't. I don't know where it says that we discussed.
It doesn't say you did.
No.
It just says that it just reassures you, that ICN had been involved.
ICN, yeah.
Yes, but if you're right that the user groups never discussed technical matters,
Yep.
Why is it of any assurance to Mr. McLeod that infection control nurses have been involved in the user group meetings? Because the isolation rooms ventilation wasn't discussed at the user group meetings. You just said that.
This is the numbers of rooms, not how it came about to be that.
Your first sentence, Ms. McLeod, says, please find below the process followed. So you're telling him the process. And what I'm putting to you is that second paragraph is an issue because you are reassuring him of the involvement of infection control nurses by reference to meetings that didn't discuss ventilation.
But what was his question? Was that what his question was?
This
looks to me as if I'm answering a question he'd sent, and I don't think that would. From my response, it doesn't look as if I have said in terms of designing isolation rooms. I think this is about how we included infection control and what isolation rooms were included in each of the hospitals.
Yes, but
I don't see where.
is there anything strange in your eyes that you've not explained to him?
I don't know what his question was.
Well, you've told him there are isolation rooms, but you haven't told him what sort they are.
No, because they're all different isolation rooms.
Does it matter?
Well, I don't know. No, it does. Yes, the Schahalian rooms would be completely different from the cardiology ward.
What sort would the cardiology ward be?
It would be to stop infection getting into particularly vulnerable patients. So each ward had a few isolation rooms. I can't remember whether it was positive or negative. I can't remember. They would not have lobbies in them. They would just be what we would describe as isolation rooms, so that a patient was more protected in terms of infection control, as described and advised by Jackie Balmroy or Annette Rankin. And Schahalian bone marrow rooms were a whole different level of infection control. They're completely different rooms.
The difficulty that I'm finding, and I'm grateful if you could help me, is that I have evidence from Mr. Walsh that the infection control nurses have no expertise in ventilation. I mean, I recognise you didn't hear that, but that's what he said.
No, I understand that that's what you're saying to me, but that does not describe how to design an infection control.
No, but it does describe
an isolation room. It tells you. I don't know what his question was, but I'm assuming from my answer he's asked me how many infection rooms are in the hospital and why did we come up with that number. And I'm telling him it was infection control nurses that told us what number we needed, and this is where the isolation rooms are. I haven't described what those isolation rooms are, and Schahalian bone marrow transplant rooms are completely different from an isolation room in a cardiology ward.
Why do you think infection control nurses told you how many isolation rooms to have?
Because they looked at the patient cohort, how many people were coming through, and what was a reasonable number to have in these areas.
How could they give that advice if they don't have any experience in ventilation systems?
This isn't about the ventilation, this is about isolation of patients. This is to put in some of the children's hospital is 4-bedded wards, some are individual, and this is about particularly vulnerable children who could not be in the 4-bedded ward and couldn't be in the middle of a busy ward with people coming in and out. They tended to be at the quiet end of the ward, and there was less throughput and there would be less chance of infection going into those rooms. That's what those rooms are. Bone marrow is completely in the middle of a department with extremely ill children, and it was a completely different number.
From your perspective, what role does ventilation play in the design and operation of an isolation room?
Well, from my recollection, I have got no expert knowledge to tell you this, but it was either positive or negative, and I can't remember why you needed one. So if the corridor was, I can't remember.
Okay, if we can go on to the next page. So let's move on to question 14 on your statement, which is on page 295. So this describes how a phone call was made in the spring of 2015 by Jennifer Armstrong to you, saying the clinicians from the Royal Hospital of Children had contacted her to inform that the bone marrow rooms were not properly completed. Do you mean the isolation rooms in the Schahalian unit, in Ward 2A?
That's why my recollection is that's what it was.
And do you think it might have helped to prevent that happening if, when Carol Brady had been back in touch with you back in 2013, rather than saying, we'll get back in touch with you later, you'd sought their help then?
This was actually about the unit was actually not there. This isn't about what it should be or what it shouldn't be doing. The physical, my understanding is it was the physical
The filter
air
was missing.
control unit that should sit above the bone marrow wasn't actually in the position at all.
Well, are you aware of whether any other faults were merged with these rooms later,
No,
during 2015?
no. I left the project in June that year.
And what did you do after that?
I went on to procurement.
I'd like to look at an email in bundle 23, document 118, page 1104. So this is an email from Fiona McCluskey at the bottom of the page to Craig Williams, 20th of August 14. And she's sending the ADB sheet for the isolation rooms in the Channeling unit to Craig Williams, because we're talking about the lobbied rooms in the National in the new South Glasgow Hospital. And you look at the bottom, it says, I understand that Mairi McLeod is arranging a meeting to discuss the isolation room, the new children hemato-oncology unit, to discuss the ventilation of rooms. So you seem to have been organising meetings about ventilation.
I don't remember. I don't remember that.
And then on the 20th of August 14, Professor Williams responds to her, I recognise you weren't included in the email. Thanks for information, but I need an assessment from the design team to assure me that the rooms met the specification I described in the early email, which I think is 2013. This is because the Brownlee is moving to the south and all of our MRTD patients were married. Now that's an adult patient issue.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering to what extent were you actually arranging meetings about ventilation?
I can't remember. I wouldn't have thought so.
Why would you?
Isolation rooms. I discuss. I don't recall that.
So
I don't recall having meetings about that.
Because there was an issue in late 14 about the isolation rooms in Children's Hospital, because questions were being asked about whether they were the right rooms, and so a meeting would be a thing to do.
Yes.
And you don't remember the meetings?
No.
Because people had noticed and suspected they were the wrong sort of room.
Right.
You don't remember any meetings?
No, I don't.
Now, if we go to page 297 of your statement, we ask you a question about something we have called a ventilation derogation. Now, I wanted to check you know what I'm talking about prior to your question. This is the idea that in the final days of the contract negotiation, an agreement was reached, encapsulated in an M&E clarification log, that the air supply to single rooms in, now there is different interpretations to this, either just the tower or the whole hospital, were to be at 40 litres a second rather than 6 air changes an hour as required by SHTM 0301. To what extent have you been aware of that?
I wasn't aware of that.
Because, for example, you were talking a moment ago quite animatedly about the adult haematology ward and how there was rooms that don't have lobbies.
No, I was talking about the children's.
To the children's. All right, okay. Well, in that case, I won't press you on that. But you weren't aware of this decision to reduce the ventilation capacity of large parts of the hospital?
No.
No. Do you think that's something you should have been told as the project manager for the children's hospital?
Yes, I would have thought so.
Would it have made things easier?
Well, yeah, I suppose. But I wouldn't have had that knowledge to see whether that was the right decision or not. So maybe that's why I wasn't told.
What role did you have in commissioning and handover?
Really just about, we did some walk around snagging rooms, just going
So
around.
how did they work?
So we went round and just checked that tiles weren't missing, that sinks weren't hanging off walls, just obvious things like that.
Was that a sort of structured process, or?
Yeah, we kind of We walked round routinely to just see areas that Brookfield were saying were finished off. And then before handover, we walked round to see just a general snag, not what was behind the walls, but just generally what was in a room.
Because you just explained to me how important the isolation rooms were. What steps did you take to make sure that they were properly working?
Well, I wouldn't have that knowledge to check that.
Did you ask somebody else to do it? Because they did.
Peter Moore was involved in doing that with, I don't know who it would be at that time. I'm not sure who were the board's technical advisors at that time on that. There were people working with Peter on that.
Right. Now, I'll get back to the right page of my notes. I can't start asking you questions I've already asked you because that will just confuse all of us. I'd like to raise the issue of horn taps. Now, before we do that, can we go to page, back to page 297 of your, not 297, page 296. No, I think, sorry, page 298. Now, you say, in answer to question 18, that you are not responsible or involved in the decision to use horn taps. Now, I think that Ms. McCluskey might have said you attended a meeting in 2012 about the horn taps. Also present were Mr. Seaborn, Mr. Moyer, Ms. Griffin, and Mr. Hall, and that you viewed a demonstration of the tap and that representatives of Horn were present. Do you have any recollection of that?
No.
Do you think it's accurate?
No. I don't remember a meeting with taps.
Are you aware of any particular problems with taps?
Only when I was giving my interviews to the police.
Right. I need to ask you about demolitions. So if we look at bundle 46, volume 3, document 7, page 721. This is another one I gave to you this morning. And it's an email from you to Janice Hughes on the 7th of August 2013. Now, at this point, of course, there are no patients in the new hospital. And if we go to over the next page, we'll read it in order. That's probably more sensible. And we keep going a bit further on. Right, so there's a flyer message at the bottom of page 723 to lots of people. Over the page, 722, we see an email from Dr. Owens to Lynn Robertson about demolitions on site that were going to take place after the move. Do you see that?
Yes.
And Dr. Owens, who gave evidence in our second hearing, asks, has the board considered the impact on the hematopoietic stem cell transplant program, as well as the increased risk to solid organ transplant patients and other immunocompromised patients? We would anticipate a significant increase in the number of mold infections among these patients if adjacent buildings are going demolition. Now, Ms. Robertson very candidly says probably not, but she goes and asks a question. And over the next page on 721, we have Mr. Beattie. What was Mr. Beattie doing at that point?
I think he might have been the medical director for the women and children.
Right. Mr. Beattie says he'll pass it on to you. And he thinks to my mind, there's little in the way of immediate adjacency to the new build surgical box. But elsewhere, the demolition was pretty close to the SCT units. What would the SCT be in this context?
SCT. I don't know, but it's about the bone marrow rooms, as far as I recall that term.
However, you replied to him on the 15th of July at 4:04. We looked early at this process and demolitions are far enough away. However, I will get our guys to look at the actual distance and feedback to due course. And you reply, well, you don't reply, you get reminded, and then you reply.
Yeah.
On the 7th of August, I've just spoken to our technical advisor, who advises demolition of the surgical block is 115 metres from the air handler unit for Schiehallion, which would be sufficient in itself. However, it should be stressed that the NCH is a sealed building. There are no windows, and all air handler units will be filtered. Over and above that, bone marrow transplant rooms will have HEPA filters. Now, first question, who might well be the technical advisor at this point?
David Hall.
David Hall. Now, what awareness do you have that by this point, the board had removed the requirement for carbon filters on the ventilation system?
I didn't know that.
So where would you have got the information about filters on the air handling units?
David Hall.
Would you know the difference between a HEPA filter, a carbon filter, and a standard filter?
No.
Before I go to the final document, I think you've already answered it, but I think I should give it to you, give you an opportunity to think about this question. How did this project ensure that the employer's requirements for this hospital were actually built in respect of ventilation?
I don't know.
But I recognise it's not the job perhaps I might have thought you were doing, but you were the project manager. But only for spatial matters, you say?
Spatial.
Okay. I'd like to show you an email that Mr. Seaborn sent in 2016. And I don't know whether you've seen this before until we put it on your document list. It's an email the 23rd of June 2016. It's in bundle 12, document 104, page 813. To get it on my screen too. Although Miss Griffin received it, you didn't receive it at the time. Had you seen it before you got this?
No.
My papers. Have you the opportunity of reading it?
No.
You've not read it, okay. I'll, in attempt to, well, maybe what I might do is what we normally do at this point, do we have a short break to see if there are any further questions that you might want to look at. And what I'll do is I'll get someone to print a copy out and bring it through.
Okay.
And ask you to read it, and then I'll ask you a question about it in about 10 minutes.
Okay.
Thank you. Lord, this might be an appropriate point for a break.
Right. As Mr. McIntosh says, at the end, towards the end of a witness's evidence, we'll take a break in order to see if there's any questions in the room that require to be asked. And that's what we're going to do now. It might take us about 10 minutes, but as he explained, in the course of that, you'll be provided with a copy of Mr. Seaburn's email. But if I can ask you to leave and to be asked to come back in 10 or so minutes.
That's good. Okay. Thank you.
I have just the email and one other question, my lord, from my colleagues. So, Mr. McLeod, the reason I'm showing you this email is because I'll ask you some questions about it. Is because we understand it emerged in June 2016, which is a few weeks after Mr. Parry sent an email to Mr. Loudon and Dr. Inkster describing this ventilation change around 40 litres a second that affected many of the rooms. And this email emerges a few weeks later. I'm not quite sure there's definitely a connection between the two, but there might be. And Mr. Seaborn had retired by this point. And so this does read as if he's setting out his position as he understood at the time. And in essence, it might be summed up by the first few words of the penultimate paragraph on the next page is, over the page, we are where we plan to be. And if we go back to the previous page, having read it at the very sort of general level, do you feel it's a accurate description of what went on in the project, or do you have some questions about it?
No, I mean, I've read it. I clearly wasn't involved I wasn't included in the distribution list. My rough reading looks as if it's from the adult hospital, which is why Heather's included. But I've got no view on it.
I mean,
it seems the first thing that struck me was that Alan had long retired by that time.
Well, indeed, he retired in, what was it, 13 or 14?
Mm-hmm.
The bit that I wanted just to ask you about, in case you knew anything about it, because I touched on it with you at the very beginning, and it hadn't applied to your treatment centre at Victoria. You thought it might have been at Stob Hill. Was that penultimate paragraph on page 813? One of the key issues that we faced from the outset of the project was that facilities specify the building could not rise in temperature above 26 degrees in some months, not usual. This has been problematic with previous buildings, such new buildings as the ACHs. Now, I appreciate it might not have been your ACH, but in your work in the project team before contract close, is this something you ever heard discussed?
No.
It wasn't something that came across your radar?
No, it wasn't.
Okay. We take that off the screen. I've got one final question, which is, at the beginning of your evidence, if I understand correctly, you were explaining that if an issue arose of a technical matter from a clinician or a manager, you would take it up
the chain.
Up the chain. And I think we've shown you some emails when issues have arisen of a technical matter. And in each occasion, am I right in thinking your evidence has been you go along the corridor and speak to Mr. Hall? Yeah. And then you replied to the email. Was there any sort of formal way of doing this where you could sort of prompt a formal review rather than just going and speaking to Mr. Hall?
I could have brought it up at the project team on a Friday if there was an issue.
Did you do that on any occasion?
If I thought there was, if there was an issue, I mean, I think that would be discussed a lot would be the offices, because we got a lot of heat from the clinical staff about the offices. I mean, people would have expectations about, can we do this or can we do that? And if I thought it was reasonable, I would ask the question and be told the answer.
Just staying, I mean, I recognise that it's not your field.
Yeah.
But given that you did field a number of questions that touch on, to some degree, ventilation, albeit you say by discussing the matter with Mr. Hall and effectively repeating his words, was there ever an occasion when you received a question or query or challenge from a clinician or manager about ventilation that you took to the Friday meeting?
I can't recall. Those meetings were minuted though, so if I had brought it up, it would be there. I certainly remember the issue about the demolition, and I'm sure I brought that up at the project team when it was first raised with me.
Because I just wonder whether the isolation room issue, which does seem to have been a bit of a theme in just the emails we can find, and which obviously prompted some sort of question from Mr. McLaughlin, we don't know exactly what the question was, Could you have raised that in the project team meeting?
Yes, I could have.
Do you have any recollection of what the response from someone other than Mr. Hall was about isolation rooms?
I don't know, because I can't remember a discussion at the internal project team on isolation rooms apart from numbers required.
And not the types?
No,
That's not how you remember.
no. And my response to, I think it was Coral, about it could be negative or positive, my understanding was that that could be changed easily by the mechanics of whatever unit was getting put in. But that may not be right. That's my understanding.
Thank you very much. I don't think I have any more questions.
Right. Ms. McLeod, thank you. You're now free to go. But before you leave, can I say thank you for your work in responding to the questionnaire. And thank you for your attendance this afternoon and answering the questions as you have. It's been very helpful and I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
But you're now free to go.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Now, Mr. McIntosh, do I understand we resume tomorrow? At least the plan is that we resume tomorrow with Fiona McCluskey.
We do all indications that she will be here.
Right.
And then the afternoon, Miss Barman-Roy, who was previously Miss Stewart, I've asked Miss Barman-Roy to come a little bit earlier in case we could use a half an hour before lunch,
Right.
if that's available.
Right. Well, all being well, we'll see each other tomorrow at 10. Thank you.